Okay, good morning. We are starting. So take your seats. Thank you. Yes, well, my name is Kraler. I'm an assistant professor at Universität Krems, University for Continuing Education. And I'm the coordinator of the MIrreM project, of which this is now the final event. I'm very pleased to see so many of you, also online, and want just to say a few words about what we thought when we conceived this project. The project ran for a period, well, it still runs for 2 weeks. Formally, it ran for 3 years, but of course the preparations have started much earlier, more than 4 years ago. And when we started to conceive this project, our starting point was that even core aspect of our topic, that is irregular migration, its meaning, its conceptualization and scope are contested, and therefore also remain elusive. And this elusiveness, we think, is one of the elements amongst others, alongside others, of course, that make it so difficult to speak about migrant irregularity and irregular migration in a constructive way. So against this background, we set out to establish a framework within which elements of a common understanding of irregular migration could be more easily reached among stakeholders. And then, as a consequence, empirical statements about the phenomenon can be made and the role of policies can be examined, without falling into the trap of taking the imperfect, often problematic categories like the very term irregular migrant as some objective descriptor and neutral term. At the same time, we also strive to be understandable. So obviously we have to rely on the terms that policymakers and the public use to talk about this phenomenon. And it's a balancing act. And this ambition to be understandable but also critical and constructive, that's also the ambition that underlies the 2 handbooks for which this event is the launch event. Handbook on irregular migration data and a second handbook on regularization policies. You will find copies outside in the break, and of course it's available online. And in terms of our substance, of the focus of the MIrreM project, we had 3 central themes. Well, first of all, we looked at the quantitative dimension of irregular migration and how different aspects of irregularity can be measured. And I think it's important to stress the different aspects. You always look at, there's not a single number. Single numbers in a way are meaningless if they are not looked at and combined with other perspectives that produces different quantifications. So a complex understanding of the reality of irregularity also requires a complex toolkit to assess it from a quantitative dimension. A second theme was the way policies shape irregular migration and pathways in and out of irregularity. I think one of the defining features of the concept of term of irregular migration is that it's shaped by policies. It is defined by what is legal, what is considered legal at a particular time. It's also defined by what courts find, and how they assess the first decisions of administrative authorities and a range of other factors. So it's essential to not just look at the numbers in themselves, but combine it with a critical analysis of the policies. And third, we looked at regularization, the award of a regular resident status to irregular migrants who previously had none, which is one of the pathways out of status of irregularity. And these three themes also constitute the central themes of the three panels that we have organized for the conference and that follow later on. We were surprised by the resonance to this conference. There's, of course, fewer people here in the room and online than have registered, but still, for a closing conference of a simple research project, we thought that is quite awesome. But of course, it's also a reflection of how central debates on irregular migration have become to debates on migration at large. So it's a little bit, it reflects the salience of the topic in much a way, and perhaps, and hopefully also, the desire of many of you in the room and online to leave aside the daily fever curves of daily debates, the heated, and also polarization around issues of irregularization, and to take a step back and instill some evidence into these debates that all too often are focused on the drama, the scandalous, the extraordinary, which loses sight of the regularity of irregularity and the daily kind of struggles in keeping, in remaining regular or achieving regular status. I have now the pleasure to ask Michail Moschovokos to take the floor. Michail, you are a policy officer in the European Commission DG's research and responsible for a large cluster of research projects on migration under the EU's Horizon Europe program.
Yes.
And I would like to ask you, what is the rationale and the background for investing such substantial resources into the topic, and what are the expectations from the Commission towards these projects?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Many thanks, Albert. So I'm Michail Moschovokos, Policy Officer in DG Research and Innovation. Together with my colleague Valentin in the audience, we are the migration team that manages the migration research within Horizon Europe and its predecessor, Horizon 2020. For us today, it's an important milestone. MIrreM was the first Horizon Europe project ever, and the first one to conclude. So it's already an important milestone for us. Currently we have 14 more research projects on various migration aspects, all of which intersect. And we are working towards preparing the final years of Horizon migration research. I wanted to say a few words about your project, Albert, because MIrreM was really an example of how research can contribute to real-life policymaking. Your work has already contributed to the work of member states, and I think this is important to be able to contribute evidence, knowledge to policymaking. I have said this so many times, I feel I'm just saying a cliche, but the bridge of this infamous gap between research and policymaking is really the challenge and the heart of our work in DG Research. So a part of identifying gaps and needs for policymaking, the important thing is to connect these two worlds who have very different timelines, different glossary many times, and different priorities, and try to synchronize for the benefit of all. So in that sense, I will ask your permission to say a few words about our work on that subject. Since two and a half years now, we have undertaken a massive effort to bridge this gap, with several events, roundtables, projects, specific projects, policy briefs and so on, and constant discussions with colleagues in DG Home and other DGs within the Commission. And this effort has begun to bear fruits. I mean, the policy-making services more and more turn to us for evidence when they want to launch a new initiative or when they want to inform a current initiative. And this is the good with Horizon Research. We have a wealth of evidence, and it's not always easy to tap on them, but that's the effort. But on that, in that context, let me tell you and inform you about two upcoming initiatives which are very important for us. So the first one is on the 23rd of September. It's a webinar. It's for international organizations and NGOs. And the goal of this is to listen to their voices for the next period of migration research after 2027. And also a big conference we are organizing on the 18th of November. I guess most of you have received already an invitation or you are aware of that. I'm just seizing the opportunity to recall it here. Why we do it? Because 2025 marks 10 years since the 2015 migratory crisis, where Commission stepped up its response on migration on various fronts, including through Horizon, where for the first time it had a dedicated destination and big funding and consistent funding. That's important. So it's 10 years that Commission consistently funds research on migration, and 2025 marks an important milestone for us. So we will take stock. We will try to, again, raise awareness of what has been produced, and we want your input to design and contribute to the next 10 years of migration research. What are the gaps where, research should go, and things like that. So, with these words, again, I would like to congratulate you on a very successful project, and thank you very much for having us here.
Thank you, Michail. I would now like to Alice Milton, who is in DG Home, in the DG Home's research unit, and can say a little bit more about this bridge between research and policies that Michail is mentioned.
Thank you very much, Albert. Good morning, everyone. So as Michaelis was talking about, we're really talking today about the bridge between the research and the policy making. So I work in the Security Research and Innovation Unit in DG Home, and that's essentially what we're trying to do. So bring the research, the valuable research, such as what MIrreM has done, to the policy makers. So what we also do is we manage the research component on civil security, so that's border management issues. And that can be relevant, for example, in search and rescue, the work of Coast Guards. But what we also do is we coordinate DG Home's input into migration research. So we work very closely with our colleagues in RTD. And in that sense, our unit is the translator between the research and the policy. And this is particularly relevant, as I'm sure you're all aware, of the current implementation of the Pact on Asylum and Migration, and the importance of things such as statistics in order to get a more accurate view of the efficiency of return procedures, reintegration procedures, etc. And what research can do is it can make the processes more efficient but also fairer. And this is why in DG Home we look with interest at all the results of research and studies. And I also want to draw your attention to the fact of the importance of also utilizing that research in the field. And one thing that can assist with that is the AMIF. So if you haven't heard of it, it's the Asylum Migration Integration Fund. It's a dedicated fund managed directly by DG Home. And if I can leave you with any messages to look it up, the beneficiaries of the program include national, local authorities, but also humanitarian organizations, education, research facilities. And what we want to see is continued innovative solutions and research and knowledge, such as what MIrreM has, being implemented in the field, and that is one thing. So I leave you with the message to look up AMIF. Thank you, and I look forward to some interesting panel discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to shift now to the focus of the first topic of this morning, namely the measurement of irregular migration. And I'm pleased to invite online Frank Laczko, former head of IOM's Global Migration Data Analysis Center in Berlin, and currently a co-editor and editor of a series in global migration issues for Routledge. Frank, you have a long-standing involvement in efforts to improve migration statistics, including data on irregular migration. What progress have you made and what contribution does MIrreM do to this topic? Frank, you have
Good morning, Albert. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation and the opportunity to address you all. Let me start off by congratulating everyone involved in the MIrreM project, because I think you have really done a fantastic job during the course of this project. And I'm going to highlight three things that in particular that I have learned from the project, and I think which will have a great deal of value for policymakers. But let me start off by trying to answer your first question. And I know that in the course of this project, you often refer to 2008 and the Clandestino project. Well, my memory takes me back, in fact, to 1995, when the European Union used to run something called CIREFI, which was, now let me spell this out for those of you who were not born in 1995, as the Center for Information, Discussions and Exchange on the Crossing of Frontiers and Immigration. And in those days, the Commission used to collect information from member states, but did not publish this information. So some of us in the migration statistics field used to get very excited about being able to even glance at some of this material and get our minds around some of this data. Today, of course, there's a great deal more transparency, and I think there's been a great deal of progress that has been made over the last 30 years or so in terms of producing more statistics on different aspects of irregular migration. But I was struck by the fact that your report does highlight that it's still the case that 5 countries in the European Union still were not able to produce very much data for your report. Now, let me highlight 3 things that I particularly see as strengths of this of the work that you've been doing, and particularly the new data handbook which you're releasing today. I think the first thing, which you've already alluded to, Albert, is the importance of having a clear conceptual framework. We need to be clear about what it is we're trying to measure and what do the statistics on irregular migration really tell us. And I found it extremely useful that you start off the handbook with a very thorough discussion about the fact that, you know, people can move in and out of irregularity, that national laws help to define who is in an irregular situation or not, and that irregularity can change over time and even during the course of a migration journey. So all of that, I think, is extremely useful for policymakers, media, researchers, everyone working in this field. To have this conceptual clarity is very, very important, and especially if we want to improve comparisons of data across countries, given that countries are currently using very different approaches to measuring irregular migration. The second thing which I liked about the work that you've been doing, and I think which will be very, very useful for policymakers, is that you identify a number of innovative practices from different countries, not only in Europe, but beyond Europe. There is, for example, I think the case of using mortality data in Belgium, or you mentioned specific projects in Germany and Spain, where administrative data have been used and triangulated to help promote a better understanding of different aspects of irregular migration. So I think and also, last but not least, compared to 2008, today, social media, internet, big data are all very much more important. And you cite examples of the use of non-traditional sources of data to help us better understand different aspects of irregular migration. So all of that I commend and welcome. Then thirdly, and here I think is perhaps one of the biggest challenges that we face, you have looked at how to improve the communication of data on irregular migration, and you proposed a framework for encouraging policymakers to make better use of data on irregular migration. Now, I think this is an absolutely huge challenge, given that recent opinion polls suggest that the general public in some countries actually think that there are more migrants in an irregular situation than in a regular situation. So I think this part of the report, where you try to unpack and suggest ways in which policymakers in different countries can develop their capacities and networks, and in order to promote the better use of and understanding of irregular migration data. This is a really important takeaway, I think, from the data handbook and the work that you've been doing. Personally, I find the MIrreM website excellent and an incredible resource, and I'm sure that my colleagues in IOM, where we've done over the years so much work on different aspects of irregular migration, will find the MIrreM tools extremely valuable. Maybe just one last point, given the work that I did at IOM. We set up in 2014 the Missing Migrants Project. And it's interesting to see that still today, national statistical offices across Europe are not actually collecting data on this particular aspect of irregular migration, which brings us back to your first point about how irregular migration is defined within a particular political context. So I think I've used up my 5 minutes. I wish you a very successful conference, and thanks so much again for the invitation.
I'm happy to introduce Dennis Kierans from our project partner from Compass at Oxford University, who will say a few words about some of the findings that we found about the quantitative dimension of irregular migration.
Let's go for now. Hello, everybody. I had a lovely adventure in a taxi this morning to the airport and back here, so apologies for being a little bit late.
How many irregular migrants?
No, we're having a little technical difficulty, I guess.
Okay.
If need be, I can go sans PowerPoint, but it's a little bit less compelling. Pardon me?
If you want to start, then we put it as soon as it's ready.
Okay, sure. Right, so I'm going to talk about three quick things very quickly today, in as little time as possible, but three fairly big things that constituted, I think, quite large contributions of the MIrreM project overall. First, I'm going to talk about how we compiled and assessed the public database on irregular migrant stocks. Then I'm going to talk about the top-line findings from that database. And then I'm going to talk about really new efforts we've made to make it more accessible and to use it more effectively, we hope. So one of the main tasks of the MIrreM project was collecting and assessing irregular migrant stocks in the 20 countries under the project's purview. And we are doing this over the period 2008 to 2023. And the way that we went about this was through national teams who had real expertise in the countries that they are working in. So coordinated through Oxford, through myself and a colleague, we worked with these teams who were doing desk research, interviewing policymakers, NSOs, and they were reporting back to us the figures themselves, the estimates themselves, but also critically, they were reporting back on the quality of these estimates. And to do that, we developed an assessment tool, which I, in another lifetime, will show you, that basically broke down the any estimate into 5 criteria: accessibility, documentation, methodology, reliability, and that is looking. Yeah, okay, that is on it. And so against all of these 5 criteria, the rapporteurs from the different countries were asked to rate whether or not it got 1, 2, or 3 points. And we really clearly specified as best we could what constituted a 1 point, a 2 point, or a 3 point score. Then we took those individual 5 criterias and we worked them into an aggregate score. I'm trying to now think back to the exact figures on the slides, but let me do my best. So thinking down to the breakdown now of 264 estimates. Oh, goodness, this is great. Okay, lovely. I don't have to lie to everybody. Okay, so this is what I was talking about before. This is the quality assessment rubric. And you can see we have these 5 criteria going down the left-hand side. And then the details themselves and the kind of points that would be allocated. This required a lot of back and forth. The rapporteurs would fill this out. We would read it. We would interrogate them, question their kind of premise. We would have conversations. It was very time-consuming and rewarding in some cases for everybody involved. And this is what I was talking about when I said we took the 5 criteria and we broke them down into an aggregate quality score. So you can just see an example of what that might look like. These are rated low, high, medium, etc. And then that transpires into either a high, medium, or low overall quality score. And in that we see that of the 264 estimates in the database, the greatest proportion are medium quality, so 39%. But of course, let me turn to my notes here. But of course, the numbers of estimates and the quality of those estimates it is not uniform across countries. And we're seeing a lot more estimates coming out of certain countries, like the United States, Belgium, than we are in countries such as Canada and Greece, but we are seeing divergence within the quality of estimates coming out of different countries. For example, vis-a-vis Finland versus comparable countries. I'm not diving into this here, but of course you can drill down using this data set into the specific criteria themselves and see where certain estimates do well and don't do well, and where certain countries tend to do better than others. I'm moving now just quickly along to the top line findings. And really here what we did is we compared the most recent estimate that we collected that's of at least medium quality to 2008, which is an important baseline because Clandestino published a huge number of estimates then. And so it's mostly dealing with the Clandestino estimates. And what we find in the estimates themselves is across the 12 countries, including the UK, that MIrreM covered, there was no definitive change since 2008. Whereas Clandestino had estimated between 1,800,000 and 3,500,000 irregular migrants in these 12 countries. we essentially finessed that estimate. We brought the lower estimate up, and we brought the higher bound down. You can see the list of the other countries here that we did not detect a change in between 2008 and the most recent estimate of at least medium quality that we were able to collect. Other countries, we did see an increase, and likewise, we saw decreases in other countries too. Okay, this is all available now. Of course, in a database, which is uploaded into an online repository that is there to plumb the depths of, as researchers and people with too much time on their hands can do at their leisure, and that's good, and we like that. We also have analyzed the data set and present findings in research papers and policy briefs. It's all available on the MIrreM website. But what we also really wanted to do, and which I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do without a mouse to start clicking around, but we'll see, is we developed a MIrreM data portal. And really what this does is it brings the key findings and the key data into a more visual format that can be explored pretty intuitively. And really, as you can see from just this still, highlights the quality itself. So you can see the countries that have most recently produced an estimate of what we consider to be good quality, medium quality, and also of poor quality. I'll just point and describe what you see here, I suppose, if there's not the ability to mouse around. Okay, fine, fair enough. Oh, what's happening? Okay, as you can see here, you have, I believe, Ireland, which is just the default country, no particular reason. And you have at the top 2 bars that are the most recent estimate that we produced of at least medium quality and assessed at least medium quality in number format. And underneath that, you have the clandestino estimate from 2008, showing a much larger maximum and minimum estimate in comparison to the newer estimate. But you can also toggle, as you can see there in the different measures, from the total number to the irregular migrant population as a share of the total population. And then you can also toggle further to the irregular migrant population as a share of the total born population. By hovering over a country, and I'm being told just to wrap it up, so by hovering over any country, which you could do for me, please, you can see that a little pop-up comes and it says, go to country page. Do you mind doing that just very quickly with Italy? Yeah, with Italy. So this will take you, and the template is roughly the same for each country, but if you scroll down a bit, you'll see policy brief. You have a button that goes directly to a policy brief. You have charts here that are all of the estimates that we compiled for the country of Italy done over time. You can toggle by specific groups. So if it's, for example, the Pew estimate that includes asylum seekers, we have that. We have the one that excludes asylum seekers. We have other estimates themselves. And here we have the data now broken down as shares of the percentage, shares of the foreign-born and total population. If you scroll down just a bit more, and we'll just be done, we have a table here, all of the data, which is just a subset of the overall data set, which, if you can scroll down a little bit more, provides you with a button to download that as an Excel table. And if you continue to scroll down, you have a bit of methodology, and then the publications from across the MIrreM project that relate to, in this case, Italy. So I hope that wasn't too rushed or sporadic, and I'm here for any more questions for the rest of the day. Please approach me if you do. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dennis. We are now going to see a video just before the next panel. It's very short about the data and how we try to communicate key facts.
How many irregular migrants live in a country? In other words, how many people lack irregular status? There are many opinions on the topic, but there seems to be an uncertainty about the facts. That's normal. Not everyone defines irregularity in the same way, and available data is inherently limited. So the best we can do is provide an informed estimate. The MIrreM research project compiles various estimates and evaluates their quality to give a clearer picture of irregular migration in selected countries across Europe and North America. And the results might surprise you. Across these European countries, the share of irregular migrants among the total population has remained relatively stable over the past 2 decades. In Finland, Greece, Ireland, the Netherlands and Poland, the share is slightly lower than it was 15 years ago. In Austria, Germany and Spain, it's slightly higher. And in Belgium, France, Italy and United Kingdom, it has remained about the same. This data suggests that irregular migrants represent less than 1% of the total population of these countries. In the US, the share is higher, around 3.5%, but even this is lower than it was 15 years ago. For informed policymaking, we need reliable and precise data. But we also need comparable data. Because countries measure irregular migration differently, cross-country comparison can be misleading. That's why we need innovative and robust methods, such as those piloted by MIrreM. Curious to learn more? Visit our website for findings and recommendations.
Well, thanks very much. I would like now to invite the panelists of the first panel to the floor and hand over the moderation to Tuba Bircan from VUB in Brussels, who will moderate this session.
Hello, everyone. We have a pretty loaded program today, but I think every panel is not long enough to cover what we have tried to do in the last 3 years, because MIrreM project was a very diverse and rich consortium-led one with quite some ambitious objectives and goals that I'm super happy that we managed to achieve at the end of 3 years. So in this panel, we have really distinguished guests, because we are going to talk about something a bit challenging, sometimes a bit sensitive, or it might even become controversial, because we are going to talk about data. And we do have, I'm not going to introduce everyone in detail, but I think you do know many of them. So we have Alejandra, Amparo and Fabian. So they're all experts, as you might guess, in it, about how we approach data and how we use and leverage data to understand irregular migration. So to be able to keep some time for the potential questions afterwards, so we are not going to have real presentations, it will be more like their reflections, because I have prepared a few questions for them to really link it also to what we have tried to do. If you haven't done it yet, please get a copy of the handbook, because we have a very nice handbook on the irregular migration data. So, of course, they're coming from different backgrounds and not only the geographies, and we will try to cover all potential aspects of irregular migration data. Alejandra was one of our colleagues in the MIrreM project. We worked on a work package which was called the Innovation Lab, where we tried to see and assess which other data sources or methods can be used to improve what we already know from the conventional data. And of course, we need to hear more about the Eurostat experience. And then Spain is one of the interesting cases to really experiment, if I might say, about these aspects of different aspects of irregular migration. And I think if you are dealing with migration data, statistics, and irregular data, you may be familiar with Anne's work, because I think she's been one of the long-standing actors in working on how to make it right when we work with the migration statistics. And she's also going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the conceptualization, the ethics, and how words really matter when we even talk about the data. So in general, of course, like, it will be, again, I mean, I don't know where to start, but I'll give the floor to the women, if you allow me. So I would like to start with Alejandra. So, because your academic work is not limited with MIrreM, but a lot of innovative approaches. So would you mind telling us a bit about how can research on migration drivers and trajectories can help really to better understand the scope, but also the dynamics, because irregularity is a very dynamic concept itself as well. And what type of methodological innovations are we really talking about? Are they really innovative? So what are the methodological aspects from the academic side that policy actors should consider and try to understand, or let's say pay closer attention to?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tuba, for that question. I think it's one of the main tasks of MIrreM was to get a sense of the scope, get a sense of the size of the populations. We're talking size of flows of people coming. We're talking about stocks of migrants, and I think that's very important. We did our best to get at a number, but then we also have to talk about the characteristics of that population and how those populations change over time. So they change in, let's say, their profile in terms of education, age, gender, and so on. Like all these characteristics, we cannot really say much when we only look at this total numbers of people incoming or leaving and so on. So I think connecting that to drivers of migration, which has been studied to some extent in the case of the drivers of migration intentions, for example, or the drivers of migration behavior when that is actually measured. For the specific case of drivers of irregular migration, there's very little research because of the difficulties in measuring who is actually an irregular migrant. But those basic characteristics, there are a few approaches that are innovative in the sense that they can allow us to also not only get the number, but also get a bit of more information on these migrants. There, on the review that we did in the project, we discovered some approaches, mostly used in the US, like statistical imputation approaches, which use large databases in the case of the US, where you actually capture some migrants in a situation of irregularity, and you can sort of impute statistically what would be their irregular status or not, and in that way you can say a bit more, because in those larger databases you capture more information. So you can say a bit more how the population that you impute or you assume that could be potentially irregular with some probability and so on, like this is all statistical modeling, not just guessing who's going to be irregular, then you can find out a bit more. And in that way, I think it would be an indirect way of learning more about these drivers, because something like age, for example, which is one of the major predictors, and like when you think about who's more likely to migrate, well, the younger people are more likely to have migration intentions, to move, to cross irregularly on, for example, the Central Mediterranean road, which is one of the irregular flows that I've studied in the past. But age doesn't really tell us much more, like why is it age that is important? Is it because of low economic prospects? Is it because of war? Are they going to be drafted to war and they fear that? Is it, what is it? So I think that's how we can combine these innovative approaches to say a bit more about these drivers, because it's also the most policy relevant. No, it gets us closer to asking the why question of like, why is it that people are deciding to cross a border irregularly, or why is it that people are falling into irregularity after having arrived with a regular permit?
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah. I think we might come back with even more questions. So very much linked to that, I'd like to move to Fabian to also ask about the perspective and the experience of Eurostat, because we do know that one of the reasons of this project's call, MIrreM's calls, was that EU needs a common framework, how we can have comparable and reliable measures also on irregular migration. So how Eurostat tries to balance the need, because we need comparative data, both regular and irregular, but at the same time there are differences in terms of national capacities, availabilities. So the first question is more like, okay, how do you balance that? The secondly, based on your experience in general, so what have you learned? So not the challenges themselves, but what Eurostat and in general EU should learn about how to develop EU frameworks to have a better measurement for irregular migration.
Yes, thanks Tuba, and good morning everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. So I'm obviously taking the angle of official statistics, and we as Eurostat, we work very closely with national statistical offices. We call it the European Statistical System. And our main tool to get comparable and complete figures across Europe is in fact regulating. So I think we have learned this over the last 10, 20 years that voluntary data collections, or what used to be called gentlemen's agreements 20 years ago, it doesn't work. And so Eurostat has come to starting to regulate the statistics. And in population statistics, obviously, it's very important also to capture the hard-to-reach population groups, of which the irregular migrants are an important element. And but population statistics, but also statistics in general, official statistics, has come under a lot of pressure over the last decade or so from two sides. So on the one hand, we have a very dynamic data source background, and we have private actors in direct competition with official figures. So they don't get, of course, they don't get the trademark official figures, official statistics, sorry. But if they provide their information or their data 1 year earlier than official statistics, they are competitive. And that's a little bit the one side of the challenges, and the other side is strict cuts in public budgets, which also affect official statistics. So, and against this background, we see a very profound move towards administrative source usage in official statistics. So some countries in Europe, they have already long-standing experience. They have very good experience with having efficient production systems. Other countries are in the process of moving there, but I can tell you most of the countries are doing it. So in 5-10 years, so the next census, I guess there will be maybe 1-2 countries running a traditional census, and all the other ones will be going for register-based, fully register-based or combined censuses. So, and this is a little bit the background against which I would like to talk a little bit more about the irregulars now. Here I see three main challenges. The first one is actually the methodology proper. So since we're moving towards register sources, we all know they have their well-known blind spots. So they have systematic undercoverage, people that tend to not be registered in the administrative systems, of which irregular migrants are, of course, an important element. So, but it's not all. So this is what we call the hard-to-reach groups, sometimes hard-to-cover groups. And it is a well-known issue when you move to administrative sources that you have a blind eye in this direction. So this is the methodological challenge. There are some methods, and we're very happy to see a lot of work now, innovation on these methods from the MIrreM side. But really the methodological challenge remains. The other one is communication. So even if you have a measure or an estimate of the irregulars or of the hard-to-reach groups, we see member states being, at least from the official statistics side, being extremely reluctant to what I think it's overburdening their users with being transparent about the limitations of these estimations. So I don't see very much transparency across the countries about a confidence interval, for instance. So like what we have seen from then is for some countries that you have a minimum and a maximum, and the truth is likely somewhere in between. This is not something that is regularly communicated to the official statistics users for various reasons, and the main reason I see is maybe I can say fear to engage with the users and starting to explain to them that there are actual limitations in official statistics. And I would like to also stress that they have a point. It's not that this is very easy, you go out and you tell them. It's our figures are used for all kinds of purposes. They're used as a denominator in the per capita indicators. They're used for the weights and the qualified majority voting in the council. So you have a real issue telling these people, okay, but in the end, you know, we don't know exactly what's the number that you have to put in your denominator. So, but I think it's worth, so I think this is a challenge we have to take. We have to communicate on the limitations of estimations. And the third challenge is for sure also what I would like to call the politics. And what I mean here is the genuine divergence of interests between the EU level and between the countries as well, especially when it comes to irregular migrants. So we see a lot of different national cultures, national attitudes, and also national views on population statistics as a whole, but also on irregulars as a part of the population figure. So we have a diverse picture of how countries approach this issue. And then on the other hand, we also have a certain pressure to harmonize at the EU level. But we also have like these very strong interests. So for instance, just to give an example, some countries are linking their pension age to the demographic structure published in the official statistics. And this is, of course, something where these countries are very reluctant to change their national business model because it has huge impacts on the society. If you just like fiddle a little bit with that and then you get a different pension age, some people get maybe upset. So, but now we're at the point where the circle needs to be squared. So we want to have comparable figures at EU level, but we also want to have consistent figures for a single country. And we also want to keep in mind the national interests for these figures. And this is the very complicated area in which we have to operate, especially with these hard-to-reach population groups. And maybe just to close with one or two sentences on what we're now really trying to do about this. So as I said initially, our main tool is regulating. And we have recently managed to achieve a political compromise with the legislators to have a new regulation, a new framework regulation on European statistics on population and housing, which will replace the current legal base at the EU level, and which in fact managed to have certainly a stronger definition of the population compared to what we have now. And there's a need to innovate on the population figure, on the official population figure over the next years. And it will be very interesting to see this now being implemented and play an active role as Eurostat, of course, in having this implemented. Of course, we would like to use a lot these new insights and methods that we have learned from the MIrreM project, because in the end it is not only regulating, it is also trying to help the countries with methodology. So we're working on guidelines where we would like to digest these MIrreM methods and like to make them accessible for all the countries, because we've seen we have very nice figures for 12 countries, but what we actually need is a figure for 27 countries. So there's a lot of work still to do, and we would like to not only regulate but also help the countries to actually have good methods at hand. Thank you.
May I have a very short follow-up question based on that? So on the one hand, you talk about like being competitive means that delivering data a year before, which already ensures a 1-year gap of data availability, where we talk about the need for timeliness and whatever, but that's not the question. What I'm going to ask is, how do you see this reflected, or let's say, what is the link between the increased interest on irregular migration numbers? Because yes, they have always been on the table, but now also the international institutes and Eurostat also collaborates with academics, with others, so because they want to know more. What do you think the reason for this need to know more about the irregular migration and have better estimates from the official statistics perspective?
Yes, so I think maybe I do not really see this increased need. I think it was like this 20 years ago, and it was like this 10 years ago. That would be my reaction. I think people always wanted to, at least at the European level, Eurostat always wanted to have a good measure of this. But what we're actually seeing is now very, very slow progress. So over the time, like it starts to sit, and it starts to like be a pain in the back of everyone. And now people are slowly but continuously moving towards a certain goal, namely having comprehensive estimations.
Thanks a lot. And so now, if you allow me, I'll continue with Amparo, because the Spanish case, I think, has received some appreciation already, because you're trying to do something different with the dashboard of the regularized migrants and also the padrón. So I'd like to ask about if you can tell a little bit about how the administrative sources can be used to complement, because usually it's the other way around. So we start with using administrative sources, and we have surveys or different methods to complement what we don't know. But I think you do it in a bit differently, because like we are talking about the missing estimates or the surveys, which can be also criticized for various reasons, especially with the hard-to-reach groups. And what are the main challenges that you see, because it's been already there for some time, like for policymakers, like this accessibility and usability of the data and the dashboard that you had for policymakers and the researchers, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to try to answer the two main questions. And also following up on the 3 points that Fabian just made on the issue of undercoverage, the transparency and the politics behind the opportunities or difficulties in order to make use of potential data related to irregular migration. So in Spain we have basically two pieces, multiple pieces of statistical information related to irregular migration on different aspects. But the two main ones that we have used lately are the one related to the aggregated estimates to try to approximate the best we can the number of irregular migrants living in a particular moment in the country. And then related to what Alejandra was mentioning at the beginning, some other type of register-based data that is basically the data on the people that have received a residence permit through the permanent mechanism of regularization that Spanish immigration law established in the mid-2000s in order to have a better knowledge of the profile characteristic and more detailed information on people that are actually irregular migrants in a particular point in time. So with regard to the estimates on the number of irregular migrants, we basically use a method that is very simple of comparing the number of people that a particular nationality that is registered in the municipal census that we call padrón in a particular moment of time with the number of valid residence permits that are in that same moment. So if one particular group are required to have certain type of documents to be reported as legally residing in the country, we compare the two numbers, and this is just an aggregate estimate. Obviously, this is not free of problems, but the fact that the issue of undercoverage in Spain has been reported to be relatively low or quite low over time has to do basically with the incentives created in order to make safe for migrants to want to be registered. And this is basically achieved by linking the possibility of have access to free universal healthcare and access to education, and even opportunities to regularize their status when they are irregular to the fact of being registered in the municipal census. And second one has been the trust created over time also in the fact that police won't ever access the municipal census in order to go after irregular migrants as a group. That doesn't mean that police cannot access in the context of a particular investigation that can be related to specific persons that are in an irregular situation in a particular moment, but they cannot access them for that goal in specific. And that has warranted over time a very good coverage of irregular population in the country, and the fact that these two elements have remained stable with the exception of a period of time, unfortunately, that universal health care was not guaranteed for them, but has been reestablished, has contributed very much to the reliability of the estimates that we can achieve by comparing these two issues. Obviously, this is not free of limitations, and we are very much aware of that. The fact that you are registering the padrón doesn't mean that in that particular moment you are still living in the country, so it's not a perfect correspondence with actual presence in the territory. And the other element in the equation, in the comparison, that is the registration, the police register of residence permit in their different types and typology is a register of permits and not persons, which, but the fact that these limitations have also remained stable over time what guarantees that even if the number is never precise or exact, the comparison is very stable over time, and we can trust the trends and very much the changes that we observe over time. And this allows first to have for almost already 25 or more than 25 years long a time series that allowed to see very clearly how the number of irregular residents in Spain is related very much to the business cycle, and it declines very much over time, over periods of economic crisis and increase with economic growth, but also allows to identify the impact very clearly of legal changes, immigration legal changes on this trend, and how over the last 4 or 5 years, even with extraordinary figures of economic growth, the number of irregular migrants has remained quite stable thanks to the combination of legal action with different mechanisms that allow that. So with regard to transparency, I think that Spain is quite transparent in the limitations of the figures, thanks to the fact that the sources that we use have remained stable over time, and they are both register-based. And finally, regarding the politics, obviously, and but this stability have allowed to make a lot of analysis that go beyond the number, and allows us also to understand, for instance, something that Franca was also mentioning in the introduction, that is the relation between irregular entries and irregular residents, which is very much distorted in the public debate. And in our case, for instance, we know that most of the irregular arrivals by boat come from Africa, but most of the irregular residents are Latin Americans. And that forces you to analyze which is the immigration politics behind the transition from irregular entry to irregular residence. So one of the multiple advantages of having register-based data stable over time in order to analyze these two issues is that allow you to go deeper into the factors that explain changes over time in the number of irregular migrants, even if they are not ever perfect estimates, and we need to live with it.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. You made a perfect transition to my next question to Anne, because I think we should also talk about the elephant in the room and the politics of particularly irregular migration data. So, Anne, you've mentioned a lot, you talked a lot about the politics of the migration data and its use in the policy making. So from your perspective, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how these questions are framed. I think that is very important to start with, and also like how can we ensure that the measurement of irregular migration is not only technically and methodologically sound, but also ethically and socially responsible, transparent, and of course still policy relevant.
Yeah, thank you. That's not an easy question to answer, of course. But I think we've just heard a wonderful example from Amparo of how if you approach migration issues as an issue around people as well as policy and as well as security, that if you include the safety of the human beings as an element alongside the security of the state, then you can make it more possible for people to feel able to give their data, to register in, and to improve the data collection system, which should be never the primary purpose of what we're doing. It should be a way to enhance improvements in policy and service delivery. So I think that it's just an excellent example there of getting the priorities right in a holistic way in policy terms. And in order to understand how to improve migration data and analysis, we need to look at those kind of examples as well, but also to understand where you need to contextualize in a social and economic way how people are being defined and how the issues are being framed. And I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things there, that the use of the word irregulars is using an adjective as a noun. So I'd plead with the Commission officials to, as I always used to in Eurostat when I was there before, please don't use the word irregular to define an essential characteristic of a human being. It's their status that is being constructed through the legal and administrative processes that puts people into an irregular situation. And I think that would help as well to get that conceptual clarity, as well as to keep the balance with the issues around safety and the moral and ethical issues that we're dealing with, issues around human beings. So it's a question about how you frame the issue, how you frame the questions, and then instead of being lost in the rabbit hole of constantly looking for precise definitions, precise concepts around characteristics of people, we can also accept that dealing with human beings means understanding that what we're doing is an art as much as a science. It's not a precise science, that the definitions that we're using are the best we can come up with. And I think the MIrreM project has done an excellent job at being clear and transparent around those issues. And I'm always very sceptical and always perhaps even cynical, but I'm very heartened by the way that you've approached this, and Albert's work over decades on this, in this area, is coming to this fruition with a team of people who've really done very serious work there. So just make a plea on that point, not reproducing the faults and the problems in the data in a non-transparent way. If we do that, we can use the terms in a transparent way and say, yes, we have to use, sometimes talking about migration, we're using migrantized situations. We can't demigrantise everything whilst we're talking about migration. It's a contradiction in terms. So we need to reproduce knowledge and framings which can be contradictory and can contribute in policy terms to reproducing inequalities. So if we're using terms and concepts and ways of thinking that are embedded with, that include embedded and racialized terms and around the other, and we in danger of reproducing the inequalities in policy and the processes that reproduce those again. So it's how to step back from that involves having a kind of reflexivity, the latest way that people, migration researchers, are trying to understand how to think back on what we're doing and what we're reproducing. It's not the only way to look at it. And just on a last point, I think I should say, looking at, for example, at drivers. If we're looking at drivers, we move out of looking at characteristics of people, look at drivers. It means also looking at the policy drivers that are being produced in the European Union or in the UK, where I'm from, that what are those policy issues that are driving migration that come from the very policymakers who are concerned about the migration flows. And the most important one of those for me is to reiterate Frank's point about the deaths, the data on deaths, the fact that deaths of people who are defined as the other are not being seen as being an essential part of population data. Means that's embedded the very concept that we're not talking about people. And so I think you think about the society, think about people, and obviously those issues should be as much priority for statisticians working on migration as for the policymakers. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Anne. So we have been a handful of researchers in the Innovation Lab. I mean, only a few of us are here. I mean, Jasper is not here, who was leading the work package to work with Alejandra with about how can we really use social media data, like to really develop some estimates and understandings. I see at 30 here and his team, they were working on the air traffic data, like a very regular one, but still a big data, how we can really capture seasonality and how we can develop measures. And Carlos is not here today, but the UK team worked on how can a survey, which is not population registers based sampled, can help to estimate the irregular migration in different ways. And that we be with Johan, who is also not here, we try to use mortality data. So these are not the only options, but we were we were trying to experiment a bit to understand what they can teach us, not claiming that they are the ultimate solution to the problems. And I'd like to leave the floor for your questions by saying that we have been very, very cautious from the very beginning, because a lot of the times, innovative or not, we think about that our research cannot be an arm. So especially when we want to know better, when we want to estimate better, when we want to predict better. So that is really important to have it from an ethics perspective as well, but also like the transparency and what we have discussed. And I think, like what Amparo said, trust is one of the major issues to make things better, not the methodologies in most of the cases. So we have some time for the questions before eating much from our coffee break. So if you have a question, you'll get the mic.
Maybe we can first start with, I think there was an online question.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so we have a question from the audience online. One is directed to Alejandra, and somebody is asking whether the numbers of irregular migrants in Spain are published by the government yearly, and then a follow-up question, I think this one is for everyone, if you actually recommend the publication of data on irregular migrants by governments.
Yeah, it was her impact. Yeah. Or you would know.
Yeah, no, the government does not publish data on irregular migrants. The government in Spain only provide periodically the data sources that allow us researchers or any other people to do the estimation. What the government publishes right now is the infographic that we were referring to, which is only the one referred to the number of people that every semester are granted a residence permit based on the procedure of permanent regularization that is approved within the immigration law in Spain. So it's just partial information of part of the people that transition from an irregular situation to a regular one, thanks to the procedure that is established in the immigration law. But the fact that the system, over years, the data sources that allow to do the estimates to everybody have been published is what is transparent in this case. But definitely also along with what Fabian was mentioning before, the National Institute of Statistics cannot publish as an official data something that is an estimation with so many potential limitations behind. And this is the reluctancy that we were mentioning before, that makes sense. So sometimes they inaugurated a few years ago a specific section that is related to experimental statistics, and maybe under that label they could do something more on that, but so far they have focused on different topics, not on irregular migration yet.
Maybe, is it working? Yeah. I see that there were around 4 or 5 hands. Let's maybe collect the questions, go back to the panel, and then we see if we have time for more. Is it okay for everyone?
Yes. Before the questions, can we give floor to Anwar for a short response to
Sure.
the question about the publication of the data?
Thank you. I wanted to make a point on the publication, the question about the publication of data on irregular migration. I think this is a very difficult thing to assess. I would suggest that it's best to publish data with full explanation, but in recognition that this makes a lot of work for responsible researchers and responsible statisticians and NSOs. And this morning I was listening to Madeleine Sumption of the Migration Observatory at Oxford on the radio in the UK, but she was explaining how crime statistics were being misunderstood or misrepresented, or that the complications of analysing crime statistics in relation to migration and citizenship. And the difficulty of doing that kind of work is that it creates a lot of work and a lot of responsibility, but I think that we can't shy away from that responsibility. the work that Madeleine's doing is really important at Migration Observatory to explain the data to audiences who already have decided what they think and that they know the truth about crime and migration when they cannot understand the statistics of crime statistics, judicial system, and they don't understand migration statistics. So I think to be responsible, we have to say, yes, they should be published, but then we have a duty as migration experts to work very hard to explain them.
Okay, thanks. I think we can gather a few questions.
Thank you. Amanda Klakowski von Koppenfels, still loosely affiliated with the University of Kent. My question actually was sparked by something Amparo said, and then Anne really set the frame for what I wanted to ask, which is perhaps another project, which is looking at the countries of origin of persons in an irregular situation. Because I picked up on what Amparo said, that you know, the majority of undocumented, or sorry, persons in an irregular situation, old words come to mind, are from Latin America. They are not what one typically thinks of in the news and so forth. I work on US citizens as migrants. They are one of the top groups of nationalities who were denied marriage visas coming into the UK. They are very often persons in an irregular situation. But we don't have any data on US citizens, right? We go with, so anyway, so that is, but that picks up again on Anne's question, which is, you know, does that bring out data that is actually, you know, sort of worsens the public situation, or is that research that is worth doing?
Another question?
I have the mic, so I'm just going to talk.
Okay.
I'm Laura Peitz from the BAMF in Germany, and I have a question to Amparo, which follows up on your question. So the data on irregular migrants in Spain, based on the Padrón data, can only be valid as long as everybody, almost everybody, registers, right? And that kind of depends on whether they trust that their data is not given to the police to kind of identify them. As you said, the police does not do. I was wondering, is it legally regulated that the police cannot access that data, and how easily would that law be turned around so that the Padrón data can actually be used to identify and maybe expel or whatever irregular migrants? Thank you.
Maybe Ahmad was the first one raising his hand, so, and then Anna, and we go back to the panel, and then we see if we have more time.
I think Vali was first. Okay.
Mine is very short and quick because half of the question was already raised by the colleague from the parliament. My name is Ahmad Wali. I'm also with the VUB. My question is particularly for the colleague from Eurostat, because I was also wondering about the comparability plus reliability of the data, because in one of the research that we did with national statistical institutions, one of the questions was that what are the methods or what are the ways that you are providing data for Eurostat, because given the new regulations, all of them, they have to adapt to the new way of providing you with the data. And then we asked them that did they really consider changing the methods, or how did it happen? And most of the countries, they said that they just changed the definitions or the names while keeping the same method. And then that means that, of course, data from different sources in different ways is being collected and then given to the Eurostat, and then it's being presented in a harmonized way. And of course, it really impacts a lot the quality of data. I was wondering how much you are aware of this, and what do you do to mitigate that? And a very tiny part on the fact that in Eurostat also the data differs from one section to another section. It's a bit confusing for us, for the researchers, and also for the general public, that why is that? Thank you very much.
Okay, finally, Anna.
We're all tempted to talk too long. My name is Anna Trendafilidu from Toronto Metropolitan University, and also a partner in MIrreM. So a comment and question. The question is for Fabian. So are you saying that Eurostat might be producing irregular migration statistics? So, because I had the impression you were saying that. And the other thing is the comment is the enforcement paradox. And I don't know what Madeleine said this morning, but what we know about crime depends on enforcement. And likewise, what we know about migrants in an irregular situation depends on enforcement. So if I look at bogus marriages, I'm going to find the bogus, the people who are in fake marriages. If I'm looking at the border, I'm going to find the people at the border. So everything depends on how much enforcement do I put. And so it's very much, and I think the average journalist, let alone the average citizen, has no clue about that. When we talk to them, and I believe I'm sharing a common experience among our MIrreM colleagues, when you tell them, there's no data on irregular migration, because if there were data, people would not be in an irregular situation. They're like, what? And what I read about apprehension, isn't that the data? And I say, no. So I think that's very important. But that's why I'm asking Fabian, so could we hope that Eurostat would do the job?
So to handle everything timely so that people can have their coffee break as well. So is it possible to talk one by one, try to answer all relevant questions for you? Or maybe we can start with Amparo.
I'll be very quick. Regarding to the question on how this is regulated, yes, this is regulated in a law that was questioned by 2003, 2004, and the Constitutional Court responded 10 years later, saying, defining the limits of access of the police to the padrón, and also classifying very clearly in which situation they could access information on persons that were reported to be in an irregular situation, and these were the limits. How easy or difficult it is to reform this law? It's not easy. The proof is that it has been enforced for many, many years. That doesn't mean that it is fully protected from any type of attempt to revert it, but so far, so good. And obviously, there is also the judicial review, which is the one that previously confirmed that this access has to be limited for very particular cases, limited to the context of particular investigations related to crime, and not just because of the fact of being an irregular resident. And regarding the other one, on countries of origin, one clarification, it's also true that the majority of irregular migrants living in Spain are Latin Americans, because most of our immigration is also coming from Latin America. But even this very simple sentence is very much distorted in the media because of the attention to the border and the arrivals of boats. So it's necessary to repeat it once and again, and this is one of the advantages of having stable data to say that over time. And the final sentence is that also I would say that the fact that we have this relatively good data for doing all these different things in Spain was not intentional, and I think this is important. This was not created in order to measure or study irregular migration. These are statistical tools that are crucial for the organization of the country and the public services in the whole territory, not for migrants, but for Spaniards. And this is why we need to think of statistical tools that are helpful for many other things without forgetting the fact that migrants, also irregular migrants, are living with us, and statistics shouldn't forget about them. But the tools shouldn't be specific for that, because this is what makes them weak in times of political questioning.
Thanks a lot. Alejandra?
Yeah, I can comment on a few on the topic, that the questions that were raised. So on the comparability across countries, the challenge of comparing statistics across countries. In one of the pilots that we developed using Facebook data, which is pretty much comparable. Facebook has its own procedures to define, to collect their data, and a margin of error. I think we made progress in that direction, but at the same time, we're still based on the actual official statistics data of each of the national statistical offices and however they define their populations, whatever operations they have, whether it's register, whether it's a sample, whether it's the census, whether it's projections in some cases. So it's still a problem to sort of make that compatible. But one of the arguments we made in the handbook was that a lot of the data that we are using in the innovative pilots and in the more traditional register base should be considered as a metadata, meaning data about these people who are existing in the country and inhabiting the space. This, the fact that they're in a space, it leaves some kind of traces. And this is what in the sort of digital demography, computational social science are known as footprints or digital footprints. And that's the kind of thinking that we have to start when we talk about data, because there is data about irregular migrants. It's very patchy. It's very incomplete. The case of the migrant deaths in the Mediterranean and across the world is one really clear example. You have some deaths, but the majority you don't know. You don't know how many happen. So there is this hidden number in that context. And I think just to connect to the enforcement idea, some of the data that is being produced is indeed through some kind of operations. It can be a census, that's a way of producing data. It can be a border patrol in between Poland and Belarus, that's another way of producing data. And the challenge of estimating irregular migration is to be able to link that to other existing data. So in some of these pilots, and I hope you all consult and read and engage with, we actually try to do that, to link those numbers, because that's kind of how you do. You get an incomplete picture in all cases. The official statistics, they also undercover, and there is no full count of the population. It's impossible, almost by definition. And census, as a statistical procedure, documents undercoverage, net coverage rates, and so on. And the US is a very good case where they actually publish this. The Hispanic population, the Native American population, they have higher undercoverage in their census, for example. That's something that they know, that it happens systematically because of various reasons. So if we think about it that way, it's moving forward the idea that there is no data, or that the data that it's out there is misinterpreted. It's because we haven't really put it into the right context, I think. I think that's all I want to say.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I'll try and cover as many points as I can in a very short time. The point about what was being... sorry, go back. So Joanna, I'll try and answer everything. John, the question about comparability, reliability, and the margin of error to tolerate, I think I would take an approach of stepping back one and saying, what is being measured, who is deciding what is being measured, and what is it being used for? Why is this measurement being taken? And the idea that what's actually being collected is data on administrative actions or the workings of an enforcement system, or the workings at the border, but not just a partial picture of that. It might be more helpful for the purposes of what the researchers and policymakers want to do, to kind of accept that you'll only ever get a percentage number in relation to a static stock population in any one year that could represent a churn of people who are in different states of different irregularity. And that might be the nearest way to get to an idea of stability in the system will help with that. You say change between such and such a percentage. I'd just like to flag up one report that I worked on with Dennis, who's in ECOWAS, where we looked at how policy needs can drive the production of data on migration. And this could also apply to understanding undocumented migration or irregular migration. So we produced a report for IOM and for ECOWAS, for the West African countries, on how the systems of data collection, not the data themselves, but to have a common understanding of what you're trying to collect and why you're trying to collect the data and what purposes they will be put to, and these involve the social and economic needs of the whole population, including people who are in mobile migrant situations. So whether those people are defined as being in irregular or regular situation becomes secondary to what the social and economic needs are of the total population. So that's another way of doing it, to say that's driven by common policies.
Thank you. And last but not least, Fabian.
Yes, thanks. I also tried to integrate all the questions into one reply. So I have to get a little bit more technical, but since I said half an hour ago that official statisticians are usually afraid to do so, I should now be a good example and try actually to explain it. So first and foremost, we do not publish official statistics on irregular migrant stocks. Our main goal is to have this group included in the total population figure as part of the hard-to-reach groups. So as a let's say as a coverage correction to the population figures. So this is our main goal, and even that is really, really hard to achieve. So what we currently have as a legal base is one single data product giving the total population of each member state, where the population figure has to be corrected for these hard-to-reach groups. So the countries have to make an effort to understand the coverage or the miscoverage and to correct it. But this obviously, this is a budget thing. So it's not only the irregulars, it's the homeless, but it's also the emigrants who might still be staying in the registers and where they have to make an effort to understand how many of them are actually not there anymore. So for some countries, this correction is positive, and for others, the net effect is actually negative. And that also is what establishes this difference between the different population figures that you see in our product. So we have this one product which is used for the qualified majority voting, where all these corrections have to be done. And in all the other products, we have, okay, to say it very bluntly, a loophole in the current legislation where NSIs are eventually they're allowed to just not make this correction for all the other tables with the breakdowns, sex, age, and so on. And that's where this difference enters between the total population figures across our products. The good news is that with the new legislation that is going to be adopted this year, this will be improved. But okay, we have to implement, it will take a few years, you will have to wait a bit longer, but like in the midterm future, there will be a single total population figure, at least across all the products. So this is coming at the end of the tunnel. And maybe we can also do something. So what we as Eurostat would like to do is we would, in any case, like to understand better what is the situation on the ground with the irregulars, but not only with them. So we're really interested in all the components of the hard-to-reach population. So we're trying to make just some projects to understand better for all the countries, where if we can get an estimate, and maybe at the end of that tunnel there might be an experimental statistics publication or something like this. So, but really the reluctance is very high to put the official statistics stamp on this kind of estimations. So maybe this has to remain outside this realm. And last but not least, coming to the comparability and the coverage assessment. So if you look at the metadata of the product with the usually resident population for the council majority voting, this information that you find there is also the information that we have. So, okay, a spoiler is you will not find much. So, we're missing this information. So we don't know. So they're giving us a number which corrects for the total figure, the countries. I mean, and it's really, really hard to understand better what's going on country by country. Okay, but this is it's a slow but productive process. So we try to really improve along the margins of implementing this new regulation. We really would like to improve and understand better what is these estimates also going into this correction of the total population. And just so for the census specifically, we do have coverage information as well. Mm-hmm. But then again, the census, there's no obligation to correct for all these hard-to-reach groups, so you will not find them in these correction factors for the coverage in the census metadata. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think it's a very rich discussion. I will come back to the extrapolation question during the coffee break, because that's how we try to estimate undocumented status people through mortality data. Thanks a lot for everyone. I think we do have now the coffee break.